In a mystical forest, the wooden puppet Pinocchio boldly declares, "My nose will grow now," while a curious audience of forest creatures looks on. For a moment, time itself seems to pause in anticipation. If Pinocchio's statement is a lie, his nose should lengthen because in his tale, lying makes his nose grow. But if it does grow, that means he was telling the truth, so his nose shouldn't have grown at all. This whimsical scenario captures a profound conundrum, a statement that flips its own truth into falsehood and back again in an endless loop. It may sound like a fairy tale oddity, but it echoes one of the oldest and most famous logical paradoxes in philosophy, the liar paradox. At its core, the liar paradox is usually presented in a deceptively simple statement: "This sentence is false." On the surface, it's just a short, self-referential sentence, but try to pin down whether it is true or false and you quickly run into trouble. If the sentence "this sentence is false" is true, then what it says must hold. The sentence must indeed be false, but that would make it not true after all, a contradiction. Conversely, if the sentence is false, then what it claims is not the case, meaning the sentence would actually be true. In either case, we're led in circles. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. Ad infinitum. We find ourselves in a logical catch-22 with no comfortable way out. To see it another way, imagine labeling the sentence as S. Now S states that S is false. There are only two possible truth values for S, true or false, yet neither one works without causing a contradiction. This puzzling situation is the heart of the liar paradox. It's a self-referential truth loop that defies the usual law of non-contradiction, the principle that something cannot be both true and false at the same time. The liar paradox isn't just a play on words, it reveals a genuine problem in our understanding of truth and language. When a statement talks about itself in this way, the normal rules we rely on to decide truth values break down. Such a paradox can feel like a mind game, but it has very real implications. It forces us to ask, must every statement be either true or false? And what exactly does truth mean in a self-referential context? The liar paradox shows that our classical notion of truth, where every declarative sentence is either true or false and not both, runs into a wall here. It's a logical knot that has intrigued and bedeviled thinkers for over 2 millennia, inviting us to explore deeper what we mean by truth and falsehood. The liar paradox isn't a modern invention of logicians. It has been perplexing minds since ancient times. One of the earliest recorded instances comes from ancient Greece in the 4th century BCE. The philosopher Epimenides of Miletus, a contemporary of Aristotle, famously posed the riddle. A man says that he is lying. Is what he says true or false? This simple question encapsulates the liar paradox. If the man is telling the truth in saying "I am lying," then he is lying, which means he isn't actually telling the truth. But if he is lying when he says "I am lying," then he is telling the truth, which means he is lying. The dilemma is the same cycle of logic that Pinocchio and our self-referential sentence encountered. Epimenides' paradoxical challenge has echoed through the ages, earning the title the liar paradox for this class of self-referential puzzles. Over the centuries, many variations of the liar paradox have emerged in folklore and literature. In ancient Crete, the philosopher Epimenides legendarily remarked, "All Cretans are liars." Ironically, Epimenides himself was a Cretan, so if his statement were true, he as a Cretan would be lying, making the statement false. A twist on the paradox, though in this form one can argue the statement is simply false rather than an endless loop. More directly akin to the classic liar is the assertion "I always lie." If someone claims "I always lie," are we to believe them? If that claim were true, it would have to be a lie, since they claim to always lie, which is a contradiction. If it's a lie, then in truth, they don't always lie, implying they sometimes tell the truth, which means the statement "I always lie" was indeed a lie in that instance. While not as airtight a paradox as "this sentence is false," it still tangles truth up with falsehood in a perplexing way. Even in everyday humor, we find paradoxical statements that make us stop and think. The baseball legend Yogi Berra was known for his seemingly nonsensical quips, one of which jokes, "Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore, it's too crowded." On first hearing, it sounds like a ridiculous statement. If nobody goes there, how can it be crowded? Of course, we understand the tongue-in-cheek meaning behind it, but it shows how a statement can contradict itself in a witty, paradoxical fashion. Another example is the advice, Don't go near the water until you've learned how to swim. The instruction defeats its own purpose. One cannot learn to swim without going near water first. These are lighthearted examples of self-contradiction. Not exactly the pure logical loop of the liar paradox, but they live in the same family of thought-provoking puzzles where language turns back on itself. All these variations, from a liar declaring his own dishonesty to a playful joke about a crowded restaurant, highlight a common theme: the slippery boundary between truth and falsehood. We intuitively expect language to communicate truth or falsehood clearly, yet these statements make that seemingly solid line wobble. They invite us, much like ancient riddles, to question assumptions and look closer at what is being said. For a long time, people regarded the liar paradox as a mere curiosity or a clever trick of words. However, as philosophy and mathematics progressed, thinkers realized that such paradoxes pointed to deeper issues in the foundations of logic and language. If our basic rules of truth falter, with a simple self-referential sentence, could that undermine the consistency of an entire logical system? In fact, the liar paradox and its cousins became central to important developments in logic and mathematics in the 20th century. Most famously, it's closely related to Kurt Gödel's discovery that any sufficiently powerful logical system contains true statements that it cannot prove. In a sense, the liar paradox had shown the cracks in the idea of a complete and consistent set of truth rules long before Gödel formalized a related insight. Many attempts to resolve the liar paradox have been proposed over the years, each trying to cut the logical loop in a different way. One straightforward approach is to say, well, the sentence simply isn't stating a valid truth at all. In other words, declare the liar sentence meaningless or outside the realm of normal, true-false evaluation. This is akin to saying the paradox arises because the sentence breaks the rules of proper reference, perhaps like a grammatical mistake or a sentence that refers to something that cannot be defined. By this view, this sentence is false would not be allowed as a legitimate statement, much as a rule book might forbid a move in a game that causes an impossible situation. This approach basically avoids the paradox by outlawing the self-referential trick that creates it. While it removes the headache, it can feel unsatisfying and ad hoc. It doesn't so much solve the paradox as sweep it under the rug. Another angle is to accept the sentence as meaningful, but insist that our classical logic, which demands every statement be either true or false, is too restrictive for self-referential cases. The liar sentence under this view might be assigned a third value such as undefined or indeterminate, or we might say it's neither true nor false. Some logicians have even suggested it could be both true and false at the same time under a non-classical logic. This idea is part of what's known as paraconsistent logic, a family of logical systems that tolerate contradictions. One radical proposal, called dialetheism, holds that the liar sentence is a true contradiction, a statement that is simultaneously true and false. Advocates of this view argue that allowing a carefully controlled contradiction does no harm, and actually reflects a reality where our binary true-false paradigm can sometimes fail. This is a controversial stance since it challenges the fundamental principle that from a contradiction, anything and everything would follow. In ordinary logic, if you allow one statement to be both true and false, you can prove any statement true, which usually spells disaster for a logical system. Only a minority of philosophers go so far as to embrace dialetheism, but it remains a thought-provoking solution. Essentially, embrace the paradox rather than eliminate it. Perhaps the most influential resolution was offered by the Polish logician Alfred Tarski. Tarski analyzed the liar paradox and concluded that the mischief arises from a language trying to talk about its own truth in a self-contained way. He pointed out that the paradox appears only in a semantically closed language, one that can formulate statements about the truth or falsehood of its own sentences. English and most natural languages are like this. We can say in English, the previous sentence is true, or this very sentence is false. Tarski's solution was to break the self-reference by introducing a hierarchy of languages. In simple terms, we need a meta-language to talk about truth in the object language. For example, if we have a sentence S in English that says S is false, we run into trouble. Tarski would instruct us to step to a higher level language, call it English 2, to talk about S's truth value. In this meta-language we could assert S is false without paradox, because we're not letting S speak about itself directly. By structuring languages in layers, Level 0 object language, Level 1 meta-language about the object language, Level 2 meta-meta-language, and so on, we prevent a sentence from ever looping around and biting its own tail. In a properly stratified system, no statement is allowed to assert something about its own truth within the same language level, sidestepping the vicious cycle. Tarski's approach, in effect, rules the original liar sentence as illegitimate in a single language. You can never evaluate. This sentence is false within itself. You must move one step out and talk about it from a higher vantage point. This idea formed the basis for rigorous definitions of truth in mathematics and logic, leading to what's now called Tarski's undefinability theorem, which dovetails with Gödel's incompleteness results. Yet even Tarski's solution, elegant as it is, comes with philosophical trade-offs. It tells us how to avoid the liar paradox by never allowing it to arise in the first place. But one might ask, is that truly a solution, or just a way to fence off the problem? It's a bit like changing the rules of the game to ensure no one can make a paradoxical move, rather than figuring out what actually happens if they do. Other logicians, such as Arthur Prior, took a different tack. They claimed there is nothing mysterious about the liar at all, because the sentence is simply flawed. Prior, building on ideas from medieval logicians, suggested that every time we make a statement, we implicitly claim that the statement is true. So the liar sentence, "This sentence is false," really translates to, "This sentence is true and this sentence is false," which is just a flat-out contradiction. Seen this way, the liar paradox disappears. "This sentence is false" is simply a false statement since it asserts both a thing and its negation. Eugene Mills and some others have offered similar analyses. However, not everyone is convinced by this, as it can be argued that this explanation sidesteps the real paradox by slipping in an assumption that this sentence is true, without resolving how we could know that in the first place. The debate over the liar paradox goes on, and it has produced a rich landscape of ideas in logic and philosophy. Saul Kripke and others developed nuanced theories of truth gaps, where sentences like the liar are neither true nor false, avoiding the explosion of a contradiction but also not needing extra truth values. Computer scientists have to be careful of self-reference problems too. The liar paradox is closely related to the famous halting problem in computing, which deals with whether a program can predict its own behavior. Through all these discussions, one thing is clear: the liar paradox taught us a great deal. It started as a simple riddle and became a catalyst for expanding our understanding of truth, reference, and the limits of formal systems. If you ask a room full of experts today, so is the statement, "This sentence is false," true or false, or neither, you'll likely ignite a passionate debate rather than get a single definitive answer. In that sense, the liar paradox remains very much alive as a thought experiment, reminding us that some questions in logic are more about the journey they take us on than the destination. Beyond the technicalities of logical systems, the liar paradox opens up a more philosophical exploration. What is truth really if a simple statement can turn truth into falsehood and back again? This puzzle is more than a quirk of grammar. It hints at profound insights about how our minds and our language grapple with reality. In a way, the liar paradox is like a Zen koan for logicians. In Zen Buddhism, a master might give a disciple an impossible riddle like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Not to get a logical answer but to jolt the mind out of its normal patterns. Similarly, when we confront the liar paradox, our usual binary thinking, true, false, yes, no, is brought to a standstill. Is the sentence true or false? It forces a contradiction either way. We are left without a logical foothold, only the pure paradox. This can be deeply unsettling but also illuminating. It shows us in a flash that our neat logical categories have limits. Spiritual teachers and philosophers have long suggested that language can never capture the full truth of life. The 8th century mystic Rabia al-Adawiyya once cryptically answered the question, "What is the difference between truth and a lie?" by saying 4 inches, referring to the space between one's ears and eyes. What she meant is that hearing about something is not the same as seeing it for oneself. The report of a truth is a step removed from direct experience. In the same spirit, Osho, the 20th century mystic whose storytelling style inspires this narrative, often emphasized that truth has to be experienced, not merely spoken. He illustrated this by pointing out that even if he were to share his own profound realization, the moment you hear it secondhand, it turns into just a concept. Essentially a lie for the listener, no matter how true it was for the speaker. As Osho put it, even if I have seen the truth and I tell you, the moment I tell you it will become a lie for you, not a truth. In other words, even a truth becomes a lie if it enters your being through the wrong door. The experience of truth, seeing with one's own eyes, is needed. Otherwise words are just hand-me-down beliefs. This isn't to disparage language but to recognize its limits. This insight resonates beautifully with the liar paradox. The paradox shows that a statement cannot fully contain its own truth without slipping into falsehood. Likewise, Osho's reflection suggests that no verbal statement can ever be the whole truth. At best, a statement is a pointer to truth, not truth incarnate. The moment we try to trap a profound truth in words, something of it is lost in translation, and what remains can even become false or misleading. The liar paradox is a dramatic logic-churning example of this principle, a truth that by being stated explicitly, annihilates itself. Consider how often in life a statement's truth can change with context or perspective. A simple example: I am asleep. If you utter that sentence out loud, it becomes false the instant it is spoken, because in saying it you prove you are awake. The very act of declaration can invalidate the content of the declaration. In daily life we don't normally tie ourselves in knots over such things. You simply wouldn't claim you're asleep while you're awake. But the liar paradox forces this scenario in a pure distilled form. It shines a spotlight on the limits of self-referential statements and, by extension, the limits of what we can state within a single frame of reference without running into paradox. From a broader perspective, paradoxes like this remind us that reality is not always as black and white as our logic or language might paint it. We crave certainty and clear answers, yet here is a case where certainty falls apart. It suggests that duality, like the dichotomy of true versus false, might be an overly rigid way to understand certain aspects of reality. Mystics often say that ultimate reality transcends dualities. It's neither just this nor that, or it's both at once. The liar paradox gives us a little taste of what that means on the intellectual level. Step beyond the straightforward true-false binary, and you encounter a sort of twilight zone where both labels fail. It's as if the universe hid a riddle in plain language to hint that some truths are not binary. Osho's storytelling often involved paradoxes and jokes for this very reason, to shake people out of conventional thinking. He pointed out that society is largely built on comfortable illusions, and that people often don't really want the raw truth if it upsets their norms. That addresses everyday life, but the liar paradox is like a cosmic joke at logic's expense. It's as if existence is teasing us. Look, even your precious logic can tie itself in a knot. The paradox shows a limit not because logic is useless, but because it has found a question it cannot neatly answer within its own rules. And in that there is a kind of wry cosmic humor. The liar paradox doesn't have a single agreed-upon solution, and perhaps that is fitting. Its enduring presence in discourse is a reminder that not every mystery is meant to be solved and filed away. Some, like the liar paradox, are meant to stay with us, to be revisited and pondered from different angles, to continually provoke thought and humility. In a practical sense, encountering the liar paradox can make us sharper thinkers and communicators. We learn that definitions and truth values often depend on context and levels of reference. We become wary of self-reference that can lead to infinite loops, a lesson that has even practical relevance in fields like computer programming or law, where self-referential rules can cause issues. We also gain an appreciation for the subtleties of the concept of truth. Perhaps truth is not always an absolute that can be captured in a single sentence. As the paradox illustrates, attempting to do so in certain cases makes the truth evaporate. On a more existential note, embracing the paradox means accepting that reality can contain apparent contradictions. Life is full of them. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. The only constant is change. To find yourself, you must lose yourself. These statements sound paradoxical, yet each carries a truth that resonates at a level beyond straight-line logic. The liar paradox is a more abstract puzzle, but it points to the same lesson. Sometimes to understand what's real, we have to hold opposites in our mind or step outside the usual binary frame. In the end, the liar. Paradox. When a truth becomes a lie, invites us on a journey through logic, language, and philosophy. We started with a playful image of Pinocchio and found ourselves delving into the slippery nature of truth itself. The journey shows that something as seemingly trivial as a sneaky, self-referential sentence can open up enormous questions. By grappling with those questions, we keep alive a sense of wonder about the world, the kind of curiosity that doesn't settle for easy answers, that is comfortable with complexity and mystery. The liar paradox remains a captivating tale that the mind tells about itself. Like two mirrors facing each other, it creates a reflection that repeats without end, daring us to find where reality fits in that infinite regress. Perhaps the true value of this paradox is not in finally resolving it as if tying a neat bow on it, but in what it reveals to us along the way. It reminds us that truth may not be a simple thing to hold, that in trying to speak a truth we sometimes find it slips away, and that this is not a failure but a profound insight. In that realization, the boundary between truth and lie becomes less rigid, and we discover a deeper appreciation for the enigmatic dance between reality and the language we use to describe it.